afraid of the dark.
The story happened to my online acquaintance. I will tell it in his words.
This happened a couple of years ago outside the city, where I have a small house. Once I decided to go there with a girl I had recently met. Arriving at the place and dropping off the food and drinks in the house, we decided to go swimming. So we swam for about 2 hours until it started raining. The clouds gathered in a minute, and the bright sky suddenly turned completely black. I crawled onto the shore and began to gather our things, and the girl wouldn't have crawled out if I hadn't frightened her with the lightning that could strike the lake. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man standing next to a tree, looking at me and my girl. Interestingly, he was wearing a dark suit, a shirt with a tie, and even a hat which he almost immediately took off as soon as I noticed him, even though it was about 25-26 degrees outside. But soon he turned away, and we went home. When we entered the house, the rain was already pouring heavily, and it seemed to start hailing. It suddenly got cold, and we had to turn on the gas heater. We decided to spend the evening watching movies. Anyway, somewhere around the third movie, we were already tipsy from wine, and both me and her clearly started to doze off. We turned off the player and started kissing, but then something unexpected happened. The phone rang. I must say that the rain did not stop, but rather intensified. A thunderstorm began, and the raindrops were beating on the roof with double force. I thought, who else could it be? Maybe the parents suddenly decided to come to the country house. Approaching the door, I looked out the window and saw that there was that man standing on the doorstep. Carefully opening the door, leaving only one latch on the chain, I asked this gentleman what he wanted. After hesitating for about 5 seconds and not even raising his head to look at me, he said in a soft voice,
"Can I come in?"
From under the wet hat, I could only see his lips and chin. The skin was very light, not tanned, like that of a person who stays home 24 hours a day with closed curtains. I was slightly stunned by such a request and replied, "No, you can't. Who are you? And how did you end up outside the gate?" The man answered softly that the gate was not locked, and then I remembered that most likely it was. The girl came up to me and said what I should have said to him right away: "We don't need guests, please leave." And then this guy said something that gave me goosebumps.
"But this is also my house. Could you at least return my umbrella? It's right in the corner behind you."
I was slightly shocked and turned my head to look back, and then the girl and I widened our eyes like baseballs. In the corner, there really was a black men's umbrella cane with a curved handle. Out of inertia, I closed the door, locked it with all the locks, and led the girl into the room where we were watching TV, telling her to stay there. I called my mother as always. She didn't answer, so it was decided to call the police. I got through to them, and they said they would come. Their territorial office was at the other end of the city, near the old market, so it would probably take about 15 minutes to get to us by car. They told me not to open the door, but we waited for them for a long time, and that man was still standing by the door almost without moving, peeping through the window and mumbling something. I approached the door closer and heard him again asking to enter the house. Losing patience, I shouted for him to get out of here and that we had called the police. And then I heard my girlfriend screaming. She was yelling from the room where she was sitting. I ran to the room and almost bumped into her in the doorway. She said that this man was standing outside the windows there and knocking on the window, but a second ago he was standing by the door and asking to come in. From the living room, we immediately went to the bedroom and locked ourselves in there, taking a bottle of beer, not to drink but to have something to hit him on the head with, if necessary. Anyway, About 10 minutes later, a police car finally arrived at the house. They started ringing the doorbell. When I went out of the house, there was no man under the windows anymore. We walked around the whole house with these guys. I told them my story, about seeing this man by the lake, about what he said, and showed them his umbrella. The police decided to search the house more thoroughly and found an old suitcase covered with rags in the hallway. I saw it too, but I thought it was ours. They opened it in front of me, and there were things in it that smelled strange but were clean, although old-fashioned. A towel slightly stained with some dark spots, some old sunglasses, brown trousers, a couple of light shirts, and several ties. They took it with them, gave me the investigator's phone number, asked me to come to the police station tomorrow and call if he appeared again. As far as I understood, they also made a couple of circles around the lake in the car. I saw their car a couple of times from the window. There was no talk of any intimacy anymore. The girl was sulking at me all evening, as if I was somehow to blame, saying that she wouldn't come here again and that she wanted to go home tomorrow and didn't want to see me anymore. We fell asleep somehow. In the morning, I was woken up not by an alarm clock, but by my mother's call. She saw that I called her yesterday. I told her everything, assured her that everything was fine with us, said that I was going to the police. I escorted my girlfriend to the train station, kissed her, and went to the police station. I came to this investigator. He asked to tell again what happened yesterday. He wrote everything down on an old computer, and the things that were taken from my house yesterday stood in the corner of his office. I thought things and documents were not treated like that. When he finished writing his protocol, he gave it to me to read in print. I signed it, and he started telling me his story. It turns out that for the past 2 months near the lake, drunk party goers have been disappearing, even those who were in the company of friends, both girls and guys. No bodies were found, nor were these people. Someone found a couple of things resembling those of a missing girl, but already somewhere far away on the road closer to another populated area, like a bag and shoes. They say they've seen this man more than once, usually near the lake, also noticed him near the school, which is right by the lake. I didn't know what to think, but then that girl jokingly wrote to me that this man looked like a vampire and his clothes were from a past era, maybe from the 50s. Suddenly, after that phrase, I got chills down my spine. There is a legend that vampires cannot enter someone else's house without an invitation. And who knows what would have happened if I had behaved politely.
About 4 years ago, when I was 16, an incident occurred that made me check if the door was locked multiple times before going to bed. On that day, I invited a friend over. I was living with my parents at the time, but they were away on a business trip, so it was just the 3 of us at home: me, my older brother, who was 17 at the time, and my friend. After spending some time together, my brother went to bed early as he had to wake up early. My friend and I were watching YouTube videos and chatting in my room. Closer to 2 a.m., my friend started falling asleep, but I wasn't tired, so I continued watching videos. Suddenly, there was a noise outside the house. I didn't pay much attention to it, because neighborhood cats often climbed onto our roof at night, and there was also a coal accumulator under the window covered with sheet metal, accompanied by a dull metallic sound, which I had heard before. After a few minutes, I saw a barely noticeable shadow pass by the window where my monitor was. It happened so quickly that in any other situation, I would have thought it was my imagination, but 2 suspicious events within a few minutes seemed strange to me. I stood up from my chair and went to the front door, and darn it, neither of the 2 locks was locked. Then something happened that scared the living daylights out of me. After locking both locks, I decided to turn on the outdoor light and look through the peephole. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a freaky face right in front of me. In surprise, I shouted, "Damn," and jumped away from the door. Outside the door was the face of a man aged 25 to 30 who stood close to the peephole. I looked again to get a closer look at the stranger, and then he started talking. The stranger asked me to let him in, saying he needed help. But you know what was the scariest part? His emotions, or rather, their complete absence. The stranger's words sounded very convincing. His voice was filled with genuine fear, as if he really needed urgent help to save his life. But his face showed absolutely no emotions, nothing, except for moving lips and a completely empty gaze. I was incredibly scared. I just stood there and watched him. With each passing second, he begged louder to let him in, his voice trembling with even greater fear. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw my brother. It took me a moment to realize that the stranger fell silent. My brother asked me, "What are you doing?" I replied that someone had climbed into our yard, then looked through the peephole again, but there was no one outside the door. What the hell, I thought. I told my brother about seeing someone outside the door and how he begged to be let in. He believed me and said he also saw someone by the window but thought he imagined it. After that, we turned off the lights in the house and looked out the window, but there was no one there. Suddenly, there was a wild scream from my friend's room. My brother and I rushed into the room and found the same man standing by the window in my room, with the same emotionless face, but his gaze had changed from empty to predatory. Despite the yard light being on and the house being dark, and he simply couldn't see us, he looked straight into my eyes. I was horrified, and then he showed the first and only emotion. His face stretched into a soft smile. He raised his hand to his face level, and I could see a huge knife in his hand. Slowly raising the knife to the window, he began to methodically tap the glass with it, continuing to smile eerily. At that moment, my brother was already talking to the dispatcher on the phone, calling the police. I don't know why we didn't do it earlier. For some reason, none of us thought of calling the police until then. As soon as my brother finished talking to the dispatcher, we ran into another room. None of us wanted to stay in the room with the window where that insane person stood. The police arrived in about 10 minutes, but there was no one in the yard. The psycho had fled. Based on our descriptions, the police made a photo robot of the stranger. The officers contacted our parents and stayed in touch with them until they arrived. Despite distributing wanted posters of this psycho throughout the city, they never caught him. I'm so grateful for my hunch to check if the door was locked, and to my father for his caution. There are bars on every window of our house. Who knows what would have happened if they weren't there?